Alright guys, South Korea is heading for population collapse. It's going to be an absolute disaster. And we're going to be looking at the numbers. Now here is a picture of Seoul, South Korea, the capital city. It's by far the largest by population. And we're going to be going back to this picture towards the end of the video. And we're going to be looking at a couple of other pictures because they tell their own little story in all of this. So let's jump into the numbers and see what's going on. So here's a graph of the population. Now I'm going to be looking at a few different sources and the figures vary slightly depending on the source, but the overall picture remains the same. South Korea is heading for a population disaster. Now this red dotted line, this is 2022, the current time. So the population is 51.3 million right now. And to the left we have population in the past. So let's have a look at 1950 here. The population was 19.2 million. So between 1950 and 2022, in about 70 years, the population more than doubled. So it was like less than 20 million. Now it's over 51 million. But look what's happening. We've reached the peak. Right now is the peak of South Korea's population. And from here on in, it's just going to decline. And let's have a look at some dates here. By 2030, it's going to be 51.2 million. So slightly less than what it is now. So we're going to see for the next 7-8 years, it's going to stagnate and just remain at around 51.3 million. By 2050, it's estimated to be 46.8 million. So about 5 million less than what it is now, or maybe 4.5 million. By 2060, it's going to be 42.7 million. And it's just going to keep going down and down. And let's have a look at the population by 2099, the end of this century, 29.7 million. So a drop of about 22 million people. So a huge drop. So just look at how the graph is. It goes way up to about now and then it's going to go way back down. So in 2099 it'll be 29.7 million, which is what the population was in about 1966. So we saw a huge population growth over the last 70 years. And now we're going to have the opposite problem, huge population decline. A population decline is basically going to mean a lower standard of living, less services. We're going to have less people paying taxes, more people who are over 65 and retired, and less kids and less people of working age, which is the most important thing. This decrease here basically means economic disaster. That's what it means. Look at the growth rate here. It was 3.16 back in 1960 and it's just declining down to like almost 0.05% now. So a peak population of 51.35 million people by 2024. So they're expecting it to grow very slightly over the next couple of years. Peak 2024 and then decline after that. South Korea has the lowest fertility rate in the world of 0.92. Meaning that on average, women are having less than one child. So bear this number in mind, 0.92, because we're going to look at some different sources where that number is slightly different. So why are women having less kids? High education costs, home prices, and difficulty returning to work after giving birth. So similar issues in a lot of Western countries. Education is expensive. Home prices are expensive. Now, the high education costs, that is more of a phenomenon with South Korea. Because in Western countries, most kids go to public schools where it's free in inverted commas. It's paid through general taxation or whatever. But we're going to see in South Korea, they have a different situation, which is why high education costs is a huge issue. And home prices, like a lot of Western countries, is a huge problem. And it says here almost half of South Korea is expected to be over the age of 65 by 2065. So a huge burden on the pension system and state pensions. And also, of course, the health service. And it just says it's going to threaten South Korea's workforce, economy, even military capabilities. So right now there's a net change of 80 people per day. So that means the population is growing, but 80 per day is not very big, especially given a population of over 51 million. That's a tiny increase. And we're going to see that go into the negative within the next couple of years. And even some people are saying, I'm going to look at a source later, saying that the population is already decreasing. So here's a look at the cities, and Seoul has a population of 10.3 million. Here it is, in the northwest. And we have some satellite cities with pretty high populations as well. And then we have some other pretty big cities. Busan, this is the second largest city. It's in the southeast, 3.6 million. So South Korea is known for its population density, which is more than 10 times the global average. So South Korea is not a huge country in terms of land area, but the population of 51 million plus makes it very densely populated. So the current density of Seoul is almost twice that of New York City. So New York City, I believe, is the most densely populated city in America, or at least it's up there among the most densely populated. And the density of Seoul is twice that of New York City. So very densely populated. And Busan is also very densely populated. So here are the numbers in the past. So the growth rate, we got 2022 at the top. So 0.09%. So a tiny growth rate right now. If we go back into the past, it was over 1% back in 1995. If we go back to 1960, it was all the way up to 3.32%. So a huge growth in the past, but now it's really slowed down. And now let's look at the future. So here we go. By 2030, it's going to decrease. So we're in the red, minus 0.07%. So it's going to decrease slowly to begin with, but then we're going to see the decrease just accelerate to over 1%. So a 1% drop is a pretty substantial drop in population. It may not seem like a huge percentage, but believe me, when this carries over year on year, it's compounded. This is a compound percentage here. So look at the populations drop. 2 million drop here, another 2 million, 2 million every 5 years. And then we're going to go to below 30 million by the end of the century. This is 2095, 30.6 million. And then as we saw up above here, it's going to be 29.7 million. So here is South Korea's population pyramid, and it doesn't really look like a pyramid because it's just collapsing at the bottom. Just look at this statistic here. The median age is 40.2 for males and 43.4 for females. So men are younger than women on average. Now, why is that? We're going to find out in a minute. Let's look at the males and females. So 15-year-olds, for example, there are 16,000 more males than females. Age 15. And let's look at 30-year-olds. There's 47,000 more males than females. So if we look at the balance between males and females, there are more males than females. But the most important point about this pyramid is how it's collapsed at the bottom. Look at that. We have under the age of 1, there's just 162,000 males, 153,000 females. And compare that to like 30-year-olds where it's about double. So the population is just collapsing. You can see it here in the graph how there's less and less kids every year. I mean, year on year is just going down and down. And look at the elderly people. There's a lot of old people in South Korea. It's got a high life expectancy of, I think it's 82 point something. So the population is over 99% Korean in ethnic background. So that means they have very little immigration. I know of some people who go there to teach English, but usually they just stay there for maybe 1 to 3 years and then they'll go back home or go to another country. So the population is very homogenous, 99% Korean. Now, will they have to open up to more foreigners? So they haven't needed a lot of immigration over the last 70 years, obviously, because their own native population is growing so rapidly. But now that may change and they may have to talk about having more immigration. But the problem is, this is happening worldwide. So where are the people going to come from? So like I was saying here earlier, the life expectancy is about 82 and a half years. So that's pretty high. And that's why you're going to have so many people in retirement age. And who is going to pay their pensions and for their healthcare when there's no more kids being born? The average life expectancy from 2013 data is 81.6. So here it says 82.5. So here we begin already with the discrepancy in numbers. But like I said, the discrepancy is not that large and the overall picture is just bleak, no matter what the source of information is. The population is expected to decrease by 13% in 2050 to about 42.3 million. And extinction by 2750 is a possibility. This is like a crazy scaremongering sentence here, but this is definitely a possibility if this trend continues like that. This will actually happen. So this links to an article, Could South Korea's low birth rate really mean extinction? A national study predicts South Korea's population of 50 million will disappear by 2750 if current birth rates continue. So this article is quite old. It's 2014, so about 8 years old. And the birth rate has actually decreased since then. So here it was 1.19. So back here it's saying 0.92. So this was 8 years ago, 1.19, and now it's 0.92. So this prediction is going to be even worse now. If they were to do this prediction again, it wouldn't be 2750. It would be, I mean, I don't know the numbers, maybe 2500, something like that. The country has one of the lowest fertility rates in the world, leading only Hong Kong, Taiwan, Macau, and Singapore. So I'm not sure if that's currently the situation. I think South Korea may be the worst now, but these are areas where birth rates are very low as well. They're all in Asia, but as most of you know, in Europe it's just as bad. So the government has tried some initiatives like matchmaking services, cash, and other incentives. Now here we go. In 1962, the government unveiled a multifaceted family planning campaign that stressed healthcare and birth control. So 1962. So let's go back to this graph here to 1962, and we can see the population go from 19.2 million to 26.8 million in 12 years. So that was a huge increase. Look at the graph here. But their policies in 1962 did nothing to slow it down. And we can see just that straight line up all the way up to about 1999, 2000. And then it starts to level off. And now we're seeing catastrophe happening. So this birth control that began in 1962 didn't really help until about 40 years later. It's so bad that there's a whole article in Wikipedia titled Low Birth Rate in South Korea. Now this is an interesting graph because it has this grey straight line here. This is at 2.1. This is the birth rate needed to replace the current rate. So if it's above this, you're going to have an increase in population. If it's below it, you're going to see a decrease. In the early 80s, it hit that 2.1 threshold. Now the population has increased since then, but you're going to see a lag because life expectancy is so high. So it's going to take, I guess, 40 years, it seems, for it to catch up. So the birth rate since about 1982, 1983 has been 2.1 or lower. And we can see it below the gray line here. It just continues to trend downwards to below 1.0. I mean, look at it back here in the 1950s, it was up above 6. So South Koreans were having like huge families of 6 kids on average, and it dropped here and it went back up again. So we had the Korean War in the 50s, the early 50s, but the birth rate went down before the Korean War. Now this was during World War II, where it went down a bit and it dropped sharply after the war for a couple of years, but then it goes up even during the Korean War. And since about the mid 50s, it's gone down a bit, and now it's just dropping like a stone here in the 70s and 80s, and it's just continuing to drop. And it's well below replacement rate here. Look at this gray line and look where it is here. It's less than half of what it should be. Now let's look at the total fertility rate here. Now I don't know where they got these numbers from, but look at this, 2020, it's saying it's 0.837. And remember, we had the number back here of 0.92. So this one is saying it's even worse, 0.8 as opposed to 0.9. And this I found very interesting. So it breaks down different areas in South Korea. So here we go, the total fertility rate. Look at Seoul. Remember, the most densely populated city in South Korea. It's got a fertility rate of just 0.64. And Busan, the second largest city, very densely populated, is 0.75. So the bigger and the more densely populated a city is, the lower the birth rate. And the cities just get more densely and densely populated as people continue to migrate to these large cities from rural areas. But there's no region here that's anywhere near replacement rate. We have this Xinjiang, which is 1.28. That's the highest, and that's still way below replacement rate. So we're looking at disaster here for South Korea. Now here's an article from the Korea Herald. South Korea again marks world's lowest birth rate, UN report. So South Korea continues to have the lowest birth rate in the world. Fertility rate per woman amounted to 1.1 in 2021. So again, like I was saying, the numbers vary slightly. Here it's a bit more optimistic. It's 1.1, but still that's way below replacement rate. So we're seeing numbers of 1.1, 0.9, 0.8. The proportion of its population aged between 0 to 14 came to 12.3%, which is the same with that of Japan and about half the global average. They have a very low population aged between 0 and 14, and the proportion of people over 65 is 16.6%. It rose sharply like from the previous year, so it's going up like year by year sharply. As I said in the beginning, the over 65 population is estimated to be about half the population by 2065. Now it's 16.6%. So we're heading for a disaster. So what are the causes of these low birth rates? Well, here we go. Here's the list. Sex preference, selective abortion of female fetuses. So people prefer having males and females, and that's why we have that lack of balance between males and females. So look at this. In the 1980s, you had 116 males to every 100 females by the early 90s. And in 1988, the government banned doctors from revealing the sex of a fetus to expecting parents. So look at this. From a social point of view, we have way more men than women here. You're going to have at least 16 out of every 116 males who are never going to have a long-term partner, because there's only 100 females for every 116 males. But it's even worse than that, because out of those 100 females, many of them are not going to get married or have kids, because a lot of them are more interested in having a career now. So this number is absolutely crazy. This lack of balance. So there's way more males than females. Education costs. So let's look at education, because this is where South Korea diverges from most developed countries, because more than 75% of South Korean children attend private academies. So 3/4 of South Korean kids go to private schools. And this is why education is so expensive in South Korea. So just to educate your kid, the 3/4 of them, you're paying all this extra money out of pocket rather than having it paid through general taxes, through public education. They're paying extra. So not only are these parents paying taxes to fund public school, they're paying out of pocket to fund their own kids, sending them to private school, because they think these private schools are better than the public schools. And this leads to this reason: society of extreme competition, long working hours, constant social pressure for excellence generates stress and fear of failure among people, especially young people. Most married couples wish to have only one child to devote more means and energy to the educational and professional success of that one child. So they're going to pay for all this education for one child, and therefore they won't be able to afford to have more than one kid. So another reason, female labor force. So again, this is all over the developed world. The growth in female workforce. So you got more females working, less females at home taking care of the kids. We have 2-income households. And this just drives up the costs of housing, because now you have all these couples where both the man and the woman are making money. And so people who are single, they're really getting screwed as well, because they have to compete with 2-income families for housing. Here we have an increased divorce rate. And again, this is common to a lot of other countries. So like a lot of countries, divorce rates are getting really crazy. So let's look at South Korea here. South Korea, number of divorces per 1,000 population, 2.1. And let's compare that to some other countries. It's lower than the US. The US is 2.7. China is 3.2. Australia 1.9. So it's kind of in the middle of like developed countries. Japan is 1.7. Now in this article, it's actually saying that the population is actually starting to fall already. So this article was about a year ago, January of 2021. South Korea's population falls for the first time in its history. Here's an interesting figure, because it's saying the population is 51.8 million. Back here it says it's 51.3. So that's a pretty huge difference of 500,000. So like I said, the numbers vary from source to source, but this is saying that it actually decreased by 20,000 from the previous year, which would have been, I guess, 2019 to 2020. And again, this article mentions Japan. Japan has a similar problem, and of course I'm going to be doing a video about Japan as well, so be sure to subscribe if you're interested in population collapse in all these countries. I'm going to be going through a whole bunch of countries. Here we are back to this picture. Now look at all these high-rise here to the left. Like, it's just skyscraper after skyscraper of apartments right here. And here along the river we see a bunch of apartments. And here we have more modern looking ones. Now I don't know if these are offices. They look like they might be offices. And here we have the downtown area here with all these, looks like high-rise offices. And look at this one here. We can see more clearly these high-rise apartments. And these were built like throughout the last 70 years to try and cope with the massive increase in population. I mean, look at these. How many stories are these? Like 40, 50 stories maybe. And then we have these ones not as high, but still just huge population density right here. And here's a close-up of some of these apartments. Just imagine you live in one of these cramped apartments, maybe 500 or 600 square feet, maybe 50 square meters. The last thing you want to do if you're living in one of these apartments is to have a family of 4 or 5 kids. You're thinking at the very most, I may have 1 kid. And these apartments are probably super expensive. Even with a 2-income household, you have a married couple and they're thinking, we can only afford 1 kid. And we're going to send that kid to a private academy. And we're going to focus entirely on that kid's education and try and make them richer than us. Or maybe they'll be able to afford an apartment that's maybe 800 square feet in this overcrowded city. So it's just crazy. It's like rats in a cage in this city. And people just don't want to have kids. And this is going to end up in catastrophe. I mean, this is catastrophe right here for South Korea. Alright guys, so the outlook is bleak for South Korea. Let me know what you think in the comments, especially if you're from South Korea. Let me know what's going on in South Korea. Let me know what's going on in Seoul and Busan and all these other huge cities, these huge megalopolises. Right now, we're just cramming all these people into huge cities, and it's all about working in the corporate world, having your career, doing well in school, getting a university degree, and just working in an office environment, white-collar workers, and it's just a race to the bottom, a race to try and have an apartment that's not a shoebox. It's crazy. What do you think is the solution to this? What needs to change in society? Because something has to change, otherwise the population is going to collapse. Simple as that. Alright guys, that's it for now. Be sure to subscribe, hit the like button. Until next time, see you guys later.